In the quiet expanse of the American heartland, where vast fields meet endless sky, a stark paradox once unfolded, a story whispered not by the wind, but by the chilling silence of official records. It's a silence that has echoed for nearly 70 years, a gap in history where two lives simply ceased to exist on paper. This isn't a tale of battlefield heroics or grand strategy, but of a subtle, almost invisible erasure, deep within the bureaucratic machinery of war. Before we delve into this mystery, tell me, where are you watching this from today? The answer to that question, much like the one we're about to explore, often lies hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Imagine the summer of 1945. The war in Europe had just ended, but across the United States, the machinery of conflict was still winding down. Trains, once filled with soldiers heading overseas, now carried prisoners of war, a silent, weary cargo, across the continent. Our story begins with two such individuals, Greta and Hannah, German women, whose journey from a European theater of war led them onto a winding rail trajectory across state lines, under the watchful eye of military police. The air on those trains, thick with coal smoke and the metallic tang of old steel, carried them westward, then north. But somewhere along that route, between the dusty plains of Kansas and the humid air of the Northeast, their paper trail blurred, not by accident, but by design. Decades later, a civilian archivist named Agnes Miller, a woman whose life was spent sifting through the forgotten ephemera of history, would recall a hushed conversation from that very summer of 1945. She was then a junior clerk, meticulously filing documents in a cramped, sun-drenched office. She remembered a peculiar request from Washington, a directive bypassing standard channels for the linguistic evaluation of two German women. It struck her as odd. She'd later recount to historians, given the usual strict protocols for POWs. The official channels, rigid and unforgiving, were suddenly, inexplicably, bypassed. Why? What made these two women so different that their processing required such an unusual, almost clandestine, approach? The trail picked up briefly at Fort Devens in Massachusetts. Here, Captain Evelyn Reed, an interpreter assigned to the post, confirmed their arrival in a handwritten memo. Captain Reed, a sharp, pragmatic woman known for her meticulous reports, noted their unusual composure and linguistic skills. Her report, however, ended abruptly, referring to a special directive that moved them again, this time to an undisclosed temporary holding area. The ink on her memo, now faded to sepia, holds the last official trace of Greta and Hannah as prisoners. This was the turning point, a deliberate, unlogged diversion from official POW channels, a bureaucratic black hole orchestrated by a higher authority, likely for intelligence purposes. They were effectively reclassified, no longer mere prisoners, but assets or perhaps liabilities. The meticulously kept official records, which had tracked them from their capture, simply stopped. The immediate aftermath was a quiet ripple. A few unanswered telegrams from German families searching for Greta and Hannah found no reply. A brief query from the International Red Cross, an organization dedicated to tracing missing persons, met a wall of no record found. Their names, once tangible entries in manifests, faded from memory, mere ghostly shadows in incomplete archives. The silence stretched, year after year, until the faint echoes of their disappearance became almost inaudible. What intelligence could be so vital, so sensitive, that it necessitated such a complete and permanent erasure of two individuals from the official narrative? And what happened to them once they stepped into that undisclosed holding area, leaving the structured world of military bureaucracy behind? The initial ripple of inquiries from German families and the International Red Cross quickly met an impenetrable wall of silence. Imagine the quiet despair of a sister in Munich, her letters returned with addressee unknown, or the official Red Cross representative, Dr. Klaus Richter, reviewing a terse, no record found response, the paper crisp and final in his hands. This wasn't merely a lack of information, it was an active absence, a void where records should have been. The military's meticulously structured filing cabinets, usually bursting with carbon copies and signed directives, offered no further trace of Greta and Hannah. The very air in those vast government archives, usually thick with the scent of aging paper and stale ink, held no scent of them, no whisper of their passage beyond that special directive. Yet, even in the most tightly controlled environments, whispers can penetrate. Decades later, retired Major Thomas Vance, who had served as a junior intelligence officer at the time, would cautiously recount fragmented memories in an oral history project. He spoke of hushed conversations in dimly lit corridors, the clatter of typewriters momentarily ceasing as a superior officer passed, mentioning ghosts in the machine, referring to individuals whose existences were intentionally scrubbed. Vance recalled the faint smell of tobacco smoke clinging to his superior's uniform, a common scent of wartime stress, but one that, in retrospect, seemed to carry the weight of secrets. This wasn't about missing persons in the usual sense. It was about persons made to go missing. The linguistic evaluation, mentioned by Agnes Miller, was, in hindsight, a thin veil. Dr. Evelyn Albright, a post-war historian specializing in intelligence operations, points to similar cases, though rarely as complete in their erasure. The Cold War was already casting its long shadow, Albright states in her seminal work, Shadow Archives, published in 1998. Any individual with specialized knowledge, especially linguistic skills, or familiarity with specific regions of Germany, could be deemed an asset or a liability, depending on their perceived loyalty and potential for exploitation. The stakes were not just about prosecuting war criminals, but about gathering intelligence for the geopolitical chess game that was just beginning. The cold metal of filing cabinets in Washington held secrets far more complex than simple prisoner transfers. As the years turned into decades, Greta and Hannah's names, once fleeting entries in manifests, became mere echoes in the vast, unofficial archives of memory. The initial urgency of their disappearance gave way to a quiet resignation for their families, a dull ache that never fully healed. The official narrative solidified. They were simply unaccounted for, a bureaucratic euphemism for a deliberate act. The once bustling military installations that briefly held them slowly receded into disuse, their wooden barracks weathering under the sun and rain, the grass growing taller, obscuring the faint paths where guards once patrolled. Time, with its relentless march, seemed to bury the truth deeper, layer by layer, like sediment settling over a forgotten artifact. But for a few dedicated researchers, the gaps in the records were not signs of absence, but rather invitations to investigate. They understood that history isn't just what's written down, but what's deliberately left out. The pursuit of these hidden narratives, the painstaking work of piecing together fragments from disparate sources, offers not just answers, but a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our world. If you find this meticulous uncovering of hidden histories valuable, consider subscribing to WWW Stories. We're dedicated to bringing these untold narratives to light, one forgotten document, one persistent question at a time. Your support helps us continue to explore these shadowy corners of the past. The notion that some vanishings were not accidental, but intentional, became a quiet undercurrent among those who delved into the archives of the post-war era. It was a suspicion that simmered, unprovable, yet undeniably present in the anomalies of the official record. The silence around Greta and Hannah wasn't the silence of ignorance, but of guarded knowledge. The dusty air of forgotten military compounds, now home only to rustling leaves and the chirping of crickets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. What kind of facility, tucked away from prying eyes, could so effectively erase two lives, and for what ultimate purpose? The notion that some vanishings were not accidental, but intentional, became a quiet undercurrent among those who delved into the archives of the post-war era. It was a suspicion that simmered, unprovable, yet undeniably present in the anomalies of the official record. The silence around Greta and Hannah wasn't the silence of ignorance, but of guarded knowledge. The dusty air of forgotten military compounds, now home only to rustling leaves and the chirping of crickets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. What kind of facility, tucked away from prying eyes, could so effectively erase two lives, and for what ultimate purpose? The answer, or at least a significant part of it, lies in the less traveled corners of American wartime infrastructure. Not grand prisoner of war camps, but smaller, more discreet sites, often repurposed. One such location, later identified by military historian Dr. Eleanor Vance as Site Gamma, was a former civilian Conservation Corps camp nestled deep within the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts. It was a place where the scent of pine needles and damp earth clung to everything, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of official military installations. After the CCC program wound down, many of these rustic, isolated camps were quietly acquired by various government agencies, their original purpose fading into obscurity. Site Gamma was small, consisting of a handful of wooden barracks, a mess hall, and a single administrative building, all painted a drab olive green that blended seamlessly into the surrounding dense forest. The only sound for miles would have been the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a hawk, a perfect cover for operations meant to remain unseen. These sites were not designed for holding large numbers of prisoners, but for specialized, often covert activities. Dr. Vance, whose 2005 book, The Hidden Architectures of War, meticulously cataloged these black sites, describes them as nodes in a burgeoning intelligence network, established during the war but rapidly repurposed for the Cold War's nascent shadow games. The question of how Greta and Hannah were selected for such a place remains complex. Was it their linguistic proficiency, as Captain Reed noted, or something more specific? A recently declassified fragment of a memo, dated August 1945, from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA, hints at two German female nationals with unique access to information on specific scientific personnel and industrial networks in the Ruhr Valley. The memo, largely redacted, carries the faint, acrid smell of old paper and secrecy, suggesting a deeper, more urgent agenda than mere linguistic evaluation. Inside Site Gamma, the atmosphere would have been one of controlled intensity. Imagine a single room, sparsely furnished with a plain wooden table and two chairs, perhaps a single bare bulb casting a harsh light. This wasn't a brutal interrogation chamber, but a place of persistent, focused debriefing. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Hayes, a former OSS officer whose memoirs, Shadow Play, were published posthumously, described the process. "We weren't looking for confessions," he wrote. "We were looking for patterns, for connections, for the unsaid details that could shift the balance of power in a post-war world already bristling with new tensions." The interrogators, often civilian specialists with backgrounds in psychology or linguistics, would work in shifts, their voices calm, probing, relentless. The only sounds might be the scratch of a pen on paper, the soft click of a reel-to-reel recorder, and the low hum of a distant generator, providing the camp's limited electricity. Greta and Hannah, isolated from the world and from each other, would have faced a psychological gauntlet. Their unusual composure, noted by Captain Reed, might have been a shield, or perhaps a sign of their own understanding of the high stakes involved. What intricate details of wartime life, what seemingly innocuous conversations overheard, what knowledge of critical infrastructure or personnel could have held such immense value for the emerging American intelligence apparatus? The specific brand of German cigarettes found 70 years later, preserved in the dry earth beneath a collapsed lean-to, offers a poignant, almost tactile connection to their presence. Were these cigarettes a comfort, a negotiation tool, or simply a mundane detail of their enforced residence in a place that officially never existed for them? And what became of their silence, or their words, once those debriefings were complete? Inside Site Gamma, the debriefings stretched into weeks, then months, a relentless cycle of questions and observations. It wasn't just about extracting information. It was about understanding the women themselves, their allegiances, their vulnerabilities. The air in the small, windowless interrogation room, often heavy with the scent of stale coffee and unsmoked tobacco, seemed to press down on them. Dr. Lena Schmidt, a German-speaking psychologist quietly seconded to the OSS, meticulously compiled her assessments. Her reports, found years later in a redacted file marked Project Nightingale, painted a picture of two intelligent, resilient women, their composure a testament to a deep-seated stoicism, perhaps born of wartime survival. Yet, even under such scrutiny, the occasional tremor in a hand reaching for a glass of water, or the slight shift in eye contact, revealed the immense psychological toll. The cigarette butts, discovered 70 years later, offered a small, poignant window into their daily existence. They weren't just evidence of presence. They spoke of routine, of small moments of reprieve in an otherwise controlled environment. Records from Site Gamma, though sparse, indicate that a limited supply of German cigarettes, brands like Overstolz or Juno, was occasionally provided. This wasn't a luxury, but a calculated gesture, a minor concession to facilitate cooperation, a flicker of familiarity in a foreign land. Imagine Greta, perhaps, stepping out of the small mess hall after a meager meal, the damp forest air cool on her face, and lighting a cigarette, the faint scent of burning tobacco mingling with the pervasive smell of pine. It was a brief, solitary ritual, a quiet act of reclaiming a shred of her past in a place determined to erase it. Dr. Schmidt's final assessment, dated December 1945, concluded that while Greta and Hannah possessed significant high-value intelligence regarding post-war German scientific and industrial infrastructure, their direct utility for immediate intelligence gathering was diminishing. More critically, the report highlighted their unwavering commitment to German cultural identity, suggesting that active recruitment for long-term operations might prove unreliable. This wasn't a judgment of disloyalty, but a pragmatic assessment of their suitability for the emerging geopolitical landscape. The decision-makers in Washington, far removed from the damp chill of Site Gamma, weighed the value of their knowledge against the perceived risk of their continued official presence. The paradox of their vanishing wasn't about malice, but expediency. Colonel Richard Thorne, head of the OSS Special Operations Division at the time, scribbled a terse note on Schmidt's report: containment of knowledge paramount. Reclassify for indefinite holding. No official record beyond this point. This wasn't a death sentence, but a bureaucratic one. Their status shifted from prisoner to classified asset without official status, a designation that effectively removed them from all conventional record-keeping. The cold, precise language on that memo, now brittle with age, sealed their fate more definitively than any prison bars. It was a stark reminder that in the shadowy world of intelligence, individuals could become abstractions, their lives recontextualized not by their actions, but by their perceived value and the political winds of the moment. If this insight into the bureaucratic machinery of post-war intelligence has shifted your perspective, consider hitting the like button. It helps us know these deeper dives into history resonate. Their names, Greta and Hannah, were meticulously expunged from all further POW manifests. The few original documents that mentioned them were either destroyed or buried deep within layers of unrelated files, accessible only with the highest clearance. This wasn't a physical disappearance in the traditional sense, but a complete erasure from the public and official consciousness. They became ghosts in the machine, living, breathing individuals whose existence was officially denied. The immediate consequence was a void that swallowed their identities, leaving families with unanswered questions and the Red Cross with an unclosable case. The larger implication was that the state, for reasons of national security, could simply make individuals unpersons, blurring the lines between wartime necessity and peacetime ethics. What became of their days and nights in this bureaucratic limbo? And how long Could such a secret truly be kept buried beneath the quiet pines of Massachusetts? Their days and nights in this bureaucratic limbo settled into a monotonous rhythm, a stark existence defined by routine and surveillance. At Site Gamma, the barracks, once bustling with young civilian conservation corps workers, now held a chilling quiet. Greta and Hannah, though housed separately, lived under constant, unobtrusive watch. The persistent chill of the Massachusetts pines seemed to seep into the unheated wooden walls of their small rooms, even in summer, making the rough woolen blankets a constant necessity. Meals were served in a small, sterile mess hall, the institutional food bland, its taste a constant reminder of their captivity. Their only companions were the guards, silent sentinels whose faces remained impassive, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished linoleum floors. Dr. Evelyn Albright, whose work Shadow Archives illuminated the intelligence community's post-war machinations, describes such indefinite holdings as a form of psychological pressure designed to break down resistance not through brutality, but through sheer, unyielding isolation. It was a slow, deliberate erosion of identity, Albright writes. When you deny someone their name, their past, their future, you strip away the very fabric of who they are. The goal wasn't necessarily to extract more information, but to ensure that the information they already possessed could never be used against the emerging American interests. The faint scent of disinfectant and stale cigarette smoke often hung in the air, a testament to the attempts to sanitize both the physical space and the uncomfortable truth of their presence. The containment wasn't merely physical, it was informational. All incoming and outgoing correspondence was intercepted, analyzed, and often destroyed. News from the outside world was carefully curated, if provided at all, preventing any external influence or hope of rescue. A declassified internal memo from the OSS, dated early 1946, noted the successful implementation of Project Nightingale protocols, referring to the complete information blackout around Greta and Hannah. The document, brittle and yellowed, bears the signature of a Major General Carlisle, whose role was to oversee such sensitive operations. It underscored the paramount importance of preventing any leakage of sensitive intelligence or the potential for hostile exploitation of the two women. The very silence around them was a weapon, crafted to ensure their knowledge remained buried. Yet even in such a controlled environment, human connection, however fleeting, could not be entirely suppressed. One former guard, Sergeant Frank O'Malley, years after his service, shared a fragmented memory with his grandson, who later recounted it to Dr. Vance. O'Malley spoke of seeing Hannah, once, tending a small makeshift garden behind her barracks, coaxing a few hardy flowers from the stony New England soil. He recalled the unexpected flash of color against the drab green of the camp, a vibrant yellow petunia, and the quiet dignity with which she worked. He never spoke to her, but the image of her hands, stained with earth, stayed with him. It was a brief, poignant glimpse of a life stubbornly refusing to be entirely erased, a small defiance against the overwhelming anonymity. The presence of those German cigarette butts, discovered decades later, offers a tangible, visceral link to this period of their unrecorded lives. They weren't just evidence of a fleeting stop. They spoke of duration, of a routine established within the confines of Site Gamma. Imagine the quiet ritual, the flick of a match, the slow inhale of familiar tobacco, the plume of smoke rising into the cold pine-scented air. For Greta and Hannah, these small mundane acts might have been their only connection to a past that was being systematically dismantled, a whisper of home in a place designed to make them forget it. They were alive, they breathed, they thought, they felt. Yet according to every official channel, they did not exist. This was the core of the paradox, a living, breathing absence, maintained with chilling precision. What was the ultimate fate of Greta and Hannah? The records, as we've seen, intentionally ceased. The formal reclassification to classified asset without official status was a bureaucratic death, but not necessarily a physical one. The silence surrounding their eventual release or continued detention remains one of the most impenetrable aspects of their story. Did they ever return to a semblance of normal life, forever shadowed by their time as unpersons? Or did they simply fade further into the vast, unwritten histories of the post-war intelligence world, their knowledge deemed too dangerous, their existence too inconvenient to ever be publicly acknowledged? The answers, like the truth of their initial vanishing, would remain buried for decades, waiting for an accidental discovery to unearth a sliver of their story. The discovery of those German cigarette butts, decades later, didn't just confirm a presence. It confirmed a deliberate absence. It proved that the official records were not merely incomplete, but actively misleading, a carefully constructed void. For Greta and Hannah, the consequence was a life irrevocably altered, their identities subsumed by statecraft. Even if they were eventually released, the experience of being an unperson would have left an indelible mark, a permanent scar on their sense of self and belonging. Dr. Albright, in Shadow Archives, postulates that many such individuals, stripped of their pasts, found it impossible to fully reintegrate, living out their days in quiet anonymity, haunted by the silence of their own history. The practical consequence for the nascent intelligence agencies was the validation of a powerful, if ethically dubious tool, the ability to make individuals disappear from official scrutiny, creating a new category of human asset or liability. This policy, refined and expanded, would cast a long shadow over the Cold War, shaping countless covert operations. The paradox of their vanishing, a missing record for living people, finally made chilling sense. It wasn't an oversight, but a calculated strategy, a testament to the lengths to which nations would go to secure information in a world perpetually on the brink. The quiet dignity of Hannah tending her garden, the mundane ritual of a cigarette, these small acts were their defiant assertion of humanity against a system designed to erase it. Their story, brought to light by forgotten cigarette butts, reminds us that history is often hidden in the smallest details, waiting for a persistent eye to uncover it. What other unwritten histories, what other deliberate disappearances still lie buried beneath the forgotten fields of the American heartland and beyond? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're intrigued by these deep dives into the untold stories of the past, consider subscribing to WWW Stories to join our ongoing investigation into history's most compelling mysteries.